Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and finally got my card and video done for this week's Color Throwdown Challenge. There's still a little bit of time to play along, and I will have a link to the challenge and everything in my blog post. So I'm using these Ink Road stamps that I had just shown in a recent haul video. So this first one is the Chin Up Buttercup stamp set, and I have some hot press watercolor paper here. So it's a smooth watercolor paper, and I die cut it with one of my favorite things, A2 stitched rectangle STAX dies. And then I used my anti-static powder tool and stamped the large sentiment with Versamark ink. And then I coated it with some Avery Elle gold embossing powder. And then once I had that melted with my heat tool, I thought about using the MISTI again, but I wanted to stamp the floral images multiple times, so it was easier not to use the MISTI for this. So I decided to stamp them with VersaFine ONYX black ink because I wanted to do a little bit of watercoloring. So I'm using the same little Chin Up Buttercup stamp set and the two outline flower images from the set. I'm just going to stamp them with that VersaFine ONYX black ink kind of in the corners, and then I pulled out this little, I guess you call it a little dot stamp that is in the Bloom Where You Are Planted stamp set. And I'm going to stamp that with the same VersaFine ONYX black ink just to kind of add a little bit of embellishment. And then once I have those stamped, I'm going to use the Abandoned Coral Distress Mini ink here. And the color challenge is basically kind of a peachy coral color, black and white. And I find Abandoned Coral is too dark of a color, but all I did was just water it down. And I started off with kind of a lighter concentration and then kind of forced myself to color outside the lines. I thought it would look kind of better doing a bit of like a messy watercolor. So I just added a little bit more water and just pulled that color right outside the lines of the flowers for my first layer. And then when everything was still wet, I just used a little bit less water, a little bit more ink to add a second layer to the flowers and just to kind of, you know, give them that little bit of definition and whatnot. So after I'd gone in and just added that, and I'm just using my little water brush to do this. So I'd squeezed it onto I'd smushed the ink pad onto the acrylic block and then squeezed the water brush a little bit to, you know, get that water flowing and add that little bit of pool of water so I could kind of water everything down. And then I'm just kind of picking up almost directly from that ink on the acrylic block to get the darker color. So after I had done all of that, I took my little black Soot Distress mini ink pad and squished that onto my palette so I could have a little bit of the black ink because that's what I wanted to use to fill in those little spots that I'd stamped as well as the flower center. So this one I didn't water down, and I'm not going to squeeze my water brush or anything, just keeping these ones a little bit more contained and just adding that color to the centers and to those little dots. Once I'm done that, I'm going to set this aside, let it dry, and I'm going to work on my background. So I have some pink cardstock that I die cut with one of the larger stitched rectangles dies. And I have the Between the Lines stamp set from the Ink Road, and I pulled out one of the background stamps from it. And I didn't need to stamp the entire background because this is going to layer underneath my main little panel here. So I just lined up the stamp onto my acrylic block, and then I'm going to just stamp basically around the perimeter. And I'm going to use some white pigment ink for this. This is Hero Arts Unicorn White Pigment ink. So I'm just going to start stamping along the outside of this panel with this ink, and it was pretty easy to line up. So just stamping it, I don't worry about the center at all because nobody's going to see it. I just thought it would just kind of add, you know, that extra little bit of like texture and dimension and whatnot. And I really like these patterns. They're just different. So inked them up, everything just kind of happened to line up so nicely. So I was able to just stamp it all without too much difficulty. And then for the inside of my card, I'm using sentiments from that Bloom Where You're Planted stamp set. And rather than mask off the R word, because it says you are, I just trim them apart with my scissors. I know some people freak out when I do this, but they still work fine. I can use them as it was meant to be, or I can use them separately. I just find that just quicker and easier than actually, you know, masking off the word, especially when I'm trying to heat emboss. So I just trimmed it down, and then that way I can use the small Thinking Of stamp in that set. So now it'll say Thinking Of You. So line that up on my grid mat, and then I'm just picking that up with my acrylic block. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to use my anti-static powder tool, stamp this with Versamark, and heat emboss it with that same gold embossing powder. And the inside of the card, or the card base, is heavyweight white cardstock. So I'd cut it to 4 1/4 and scored at 5 1/2. So this will be a top folding A2 sized card. So after I've stamped my sentiment and then covered it with that same gold embossing powder, I'm going to melt that with my heat tool. And then I'm going to stamp the black outline, or the outline flower images, with that same VersaFine ONYX black ink, and then also stamp the little dot images from the Bloom Where You're Planted stamp set, just to kind of pull everything together. So I decided to just stamp them, not add any of the color or anything, just keeping it fairly simple. So I'm just going to stamp them kind of in the corners, just like I did on the front panel of the card front. And then after I have these flowers stamped, now I can stamp those little dots just to kind of tie it all in together. And that's going to finish off the inside of the card. So then once I have the inside of the card done, I can start adhering the panels to the outside to finish this card off. So I'm going to adhere that pink panel just flat to the card base using my little Xyron Mega Runner here. So just run the adhesive across that. And then once I had that adhered, I decided to adhere the main watercolor panel with a little bit of foam tape. And I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Big Mama foam tape roll. So just putting that on my panel here, and always using scissors. This tape doesn't tear, it needs to be cut. So I just use my scissors for that, and since I trimmed my nails recently because I keep them trimmed ridiculously short because I just don't have time for them, I use the edge of my scissors to peel up the backing paper and then pull it off. And that's ink on my thumb, just before I get random comments on YouTube. It's not blood, it's ink. It was just the abandoned coral ink that I ended up getting on my thumb. So I adhered that to my card front. And then before I get to adding any embellishments, I wanted to stamp the back because I have this I Made This stamp set. I was going on about this in that haul video. So I stamped one of the handmade by stamps on the back of my card with the VersaFine ONYX black ink. I get asked a lot like what I do on the back of my cards. More often than not, I just sign my name because I usually don't have, but now I can use this like handmade by stamp, and then I just sign my name with a Uniball gold pen just to kind of tie it all together. But more often than not, I just use, you know, a regular pen, whatever works. And yeah, dumped all my crystals all over everything. So I just pulled out another coffee filter and poured those into the coffee filter that landed on the card. The rest I just brushed into the coffee filter and just decided just to use them out of there until I was done. So these are the Studio Katia gold crystals that I'm absolutely obsessed with. These are new. They've I think they're sold out right now. You can sign up for notifications though for when they come back in stock. So I just kind of lined up a few on my card front. And then I also pulled out some of the Studio Katia ONYX crystals that I'm obsessed with. I use these all the time. I think I've used up a good half a package of these already. So I also put a few of these onto my card front. And then I'm going to use my jewel picker and some multi-medium matte adhesive to adhere them. So just pick them up with my jewel picker, put down a little dab of the adhesive, and that's going to adhere all of these into place. So that's going to finish off my card for today. And as always, I will have a link below the video to my blog post with links to all the supplies used. I will also link to the color challenge. I linked to all of that in my blog post, which you can always check out directly below the video in the description box. So thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate your support, and I will see you all very soon in another video. Bye!